Little Johnny showed up late for school, and the teacher asked why. "I ran into a man who lost his wallet on the street," Johnny explained. "Oh, how kind of you. You were helping him look for it?" the teacher said with a smile. "Not exactly," Johnny replied. "I had to keep standing on it until he gave up and left." An elderly couple, Harold and Mabel, decided to take a dance class to rekindle their youth. During the first session, the instructor announced, "Let's start with a simple cha-cha." Harold confidently grabbed Mabel's hand and began moving, only to accidentally step on her foot. "Ouch! Harold, that's not a cha-cha, that's a stomp-stomp," Mabel scolded. Harold grinned and replied, "Well, my knees only know the two-step, and even that's debatable." The class erupted in laughter as Mabel shook her head and muttered, "Next time, we're taking a nap class instead." On their wedding night, the husband turned to his new bride with a mischievous grin. Husband, "All right, do you want to be surprised first or shocked?" Wife, "Surprise me first." Husband, "Check this out, 10-inch, he said proudly, showing off. Wife, impressed, "Wow, okay. Now what's the shock?" Husband, with a sheepish look, "It doesn't stand." Little Johnny is in the 2nd grade. Every morning, Johnny's teacher plays a guessing game with the class to help build critical thinking skills. The teacher has a secret item in a brown paper bag. She describes it to the class, and the first student to guess it correctly gets a prize. "Okay, class," says the teacher, "today's secret item is smooth and round. It has a stem at the top, and it's red." Johnny tries to answer, but another student is called upon. "An apple," shouts the student. "No, it's a tomato, but I like the way you're thinking." Again she asked, "What is in your pants that you have, but I do not have?" Johnny wondered why she would ask such a question. The teacher replied, "Pockets." This goes on for days. Johnny knows the answers but never gets picked. The student who gets to guess gets it wrong. But the teacher likes the way they're thinking. Johnny has had enough. Friday morning, before their little quiz starts, he stands up at his desk. "Hold on, miss. I've got a secret item for you to guess today." He reaches down into his front pocket, feeling around a bit. "Okay, it's hard and round, and it's got a head on it," says Johnny. The teacher is appalled. "Little Johnny, that's inappropriate." Johnny smirks. "Nope, it's a quarter, but I like the way you're thinking." Wife texts her husband on a cold winter morning. "Windows are frozen, won't open." Husband replies, "Gently pour some lukewarm water over them and tap the edges with a hammer." 10 minutes later, the wife texts back, "Computer's completely messed up now." One night, the 96-year-old runs a bath, puts one foot in, then suddenly stops. He yells downstairs, "Was I getting in or out of the tub?" The 94-year-old hears him and shouts back, "I don't know, I'll come up and check." He starts climbing the stairs but pauses halfway. Then he yells, "Wait, was I going up or coming down?" Their 92-year-old brother is sitting at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee and shaking his head. "Man, I sure hope I never get that forgetful." He knocks on wood for good luck. Then he yells, "I'll come help you both, right after I see who's at the door." The Great White Doctor comes to an impoverished African village where he sees several young mothers either pregnant or with several small kids in tow, all showing signs of malnourishment. On inquiry through an interpreter, he learned that the chief was a rather amorous character and all the ladies and children belonged to him. So he sent a large box of to the chief with instructions to always use it. A year later, he returns to the same village only to find the chief's wives still pregnant or with newborn children. Annoyed, he sends for the chief and, through the interpreter, demands an explanation. The interpreter listens to the stammering chief and explains. But doctor, he swears he always wore the Then how the heck did this happen? The interpreter questions the chief, listens and replies. He says after 3 days he desperately needed to pee, and so he made a small hole at the tip. I finally got a girlfriend long enough that I felt confident enough to visit my parents. We used her car and got a flat tire on the way. In case they were worried, I called them up and said, "Hi, Mom, I'm going to be late. My girlfriend's got a puncture." "Oh," she sighed. "I thought you were bringing a real one." Beneath a dusky Alberta sky, a man in a gleaming new Mercedes purred along the Yellowhead Highway, the wind tousling his hair as the engine roared like a contented lion. "This is living," he mused, foot pressing harder. The speedometer leapt. 80, 90, 110, until the world blurred into streaks of evergreen and asphalt. Then crimson and cobalt lights flashed in his mirror. A Mountie? In this tin can cruiser? He smirked, unleashing the Mercedes' full fury. 120 miles per hour, yet the lights clung like a stubborn shadow. Reality hit faster than the car's acceleration. What am I? Insane! He eased onto the shoulder, heart drumming as the officer approached. Stetson tilted, expression weary. "License," the Mountie sighed, scanning the car. "Rough shift. Last stop. Give me an excuse I haven't heard, and you're free." The man swallowed. "Last week, my wife left me for a cop. A beat. Thought you were trying to return her." The Mountie froze, then a snort escaped him. "Sir," he said, tossing back the license. "That's a first." With a tip of his hat, he added, "Drive slower. Some of us have X's to avoid, too." The Mercedes crept away. Lesson learned. Horsepower's no match for wit. Or a Mountie's laugh. A high-profile, big-ego attorney from the city was representing the railroad in a case filed by an old rancher. The rancher's prize bull had gone missing, and the rancher claimed that the noise from the train had scared the bull off. The rancher was suing the railroad for what he believed the bull was worth. When they arrived at the courthouse, the slick railroad lawyer saw an opportunity to settle and approached the old rancher before the trial began. After some quick talking, the old rancher agreed to settle for half of what he had been asking. Once the release was signed, the lawyer, feeling stupid, couldn't resist bragging. "Well, I sure pulled one over on you. I never could have won this case. The engineer was asleep, and the fireman was in the caboose when the train went through. I didn't have a single witness to put on the stand. I was bluffing." The old rancher just yawned and replied, "Well, I'll tell you, Slick. I was worried about losing the case, too. That old bull came home this morning." Two older gentlemen, Fred and Sam, went to see a movie. Merely minutes into the movie, Sam heard Fred rustling around. It appeared that he was reaching under all of the seats. "What on earth are you doing, Fred?" asked Sam. Fred indignantly responded, "I had a caramel in my mouth and it dropped out. I'm trying to find it." Annoyed, Sam told him not to worry about it. They could get him another caramel later since that one was ruined by now. "But I've got to," said Fred, exasperated. "My teeth are in it." Two spinster sisters, Gladys and Betty, were chatting one Friday night. Suddenly, Gladys announced, "Betty, I'm tired of this boring life. I'm going out tonight to shake things up." Betty, ever the cautious one, replied, "Fine, but you'd better be back by 10, or I'll worry." 10 o'clock passed, then 11 o'clock at midnight. Finally, just after 1 a.m., the front door burst open, and in rushed Gladys, heading straight to the bathroom. Concerned, Betty knocked on the door. "Gladys, are you okay in there?" No response, so Betty peeked inside to find Gladys sitting with a perplexed look on her face. "Gladys," Betty gasped. "What's going on?" Still puzzled, Gladys replied, "Betty, let's just say it was an interesting night, and I think I need to rethink my life choices." It was Christmas light day, and Bob was determined to outshine his neighbors. Armed with tangled lights, he climbed the ladder, grumbling about holiday spirit. Halfway up, his wife shouted, "Bob, the plug's not long enough." "Don't worry," he yelled, stretching the cord like a superhero. The lights blinked, then sparked. Bob tumbled into the bushes, tangled in blinking lights like a human Christmas tree. His wife laughed, snapping a photo. "Well, Bob, you do light up my life." The neighbors, they applauded his live decoration. A lost dog wanders into a jungle. Spotting him, a lion thinks, looks tasty. Never seen one of these before," and charges at him. Panicking, the dog spots some bones nearby. Thinking fast, he shouts, "That lion meat hit the spot. Sure hope there's another around." Hearing this, the lion skids to a halt. "What the? This guy eats lions!" He bolts in the opposite direction. A monkey, watching from a tree, decides to snitch for some favor from the lion. He spills the truth, and the furious lion growls, "Hop on my back! Let's settle this." As they approach, the dog spots them and yells, "Where's that lazy monkey? I told him to bring me another lion an hour ago." The husband was drifting off to sleep when his wife, feeling romantic, nudged him gently. "You used to hold my hand when we were dating," she said softly. Sighing, he reached out, held her hand briefly, then turned back over. Moments later, she whispered, "You used to kiss me too." Grumbling, he leaned over, gave her a quick kiss, and closed his eyes again. Not long after, she teased, "And you used to nibble my neck." With an exasperated groan, he threw off the covers and got up. "Where are you going?" she asked, puzzled. "To find my dentures," he shot back. A guy walks through town and notices a sign outside a bar that says, "All the drinks you can have for $1. Excited by the offer, he walks in, sits down, hands the bartender $1 and says, "I'll take a drink, please." The bartender smiles, grabs a tiny shot glass and fills it halfway. The guy stares, bewildered. "What's this?" he asks. The bartender shrugs and replies, "That's all the drinks you can have for $1. He fumbled through his bag, searching desperately for his passport, but it was nowhere to be found. The passport control officer, visibly annoyed, snapped, "Have you been to France before?" "Yes," the elderly man replied calmly. With a hint of sarcasm, the officer retorted, "Then you should know by now to have your passport ready." The old man met his gaze steadily and said, "Last time, I didn't need to show it." "That's impossible," the officer barked. Fixing him with a sharp look, the old man responded, "Last time, on June 6th, 1944, D-Day. I couldn't find a Frenchman to give it to." In a quiet suburban neighborhood, there were two brothers, ages 8 and 10, known for their endless mischief. If anything went wrong, missing mail, toppled trash cans, mysteriously relocated garden gnomes, you could bet they had something to do with it. Their exhausted parents had tried everything to keep them in line, but nothing worked. Finally, their mother heard about a local priest who had a reputation for straightening out wayward kids. Desperate, she convinced her husband that they should take the boys to see him. The priest agreed, but insisted on seeing the younger boy first, alone. So the mother sent the 8-year-old to the church. The boy was ushered into the priest's office, where he found himself sitting across from a massive wooden desk. The priest leaned forward, fixing the boy with a stern gaze. For a few long, silent minutes, they just stared at each other. Then, in a deep, commanding voice, the priest pointed a finger at the boy and asked, "Where is God?" The boy blinked. He glanced under the desk. He checked the corners of the room. He looked at the ceiling, but he said nothing. The priest, louder this time, repeated, "Where is God?" The boy shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting around, but still remained silent. Now the priest leaned all the way across the desk, his finger just inches from the boy's face, and thundered, "Where is God?" That was it. The boy bolted from the chair, sprinted out of the church, and ran all the way home. He burst through the front door, grabbed his older brother by the arm, dragged him upstairs, and pulled him into their usual hideout, the closet. Gasping for breath, he whispered, "We are in big trouble." His older brother frowned. "What do you mean?" The younger one gulped and whispered, "God is missing, and they think we did it." A wealthy rancher passed away, leaving everything to his devoted wife. She was smart, strikingly beautiful, and determined to keep the ranch running. There was just one problem. She didn't know the first thing about ranching. Realizing she needed help, she placed an ad for a ranch hand. 2 cowboys applied. One was a heavy drinker, the other was After much thought and not many options, she hired the cowboy, figuring he'd be less trouble around the house than the drunk. Turned out to be a great decision. The ranch hand was hardworking, knowledgeable, and put in long hours. Under his care, the ranch thrived. One evening, the widow said, "You've done a fantastic job. You should go into town and enjoy yourself." He agreed and took off for a well-earned night out. But as the clock ticked past like 1, then 2, he still wasn't back. Finally, around 2:30, he walked through the door, only to find the widow sitting by the fireplace, sipping wine, waiting for him. She motioned him closer and, in a soft voice, said, "Unbutton my blouse." Nervously, he did as she asked. "Now take off my boots." He knelt down and pulled them off, one by one. "Now my socks." He gently removed them, placing them neatly beside the boots. "Now my skirt." His hands trembled as he unfastened it, eyes locked on hers. "Now my He hesitated, then carefully slipped it off, letting it fall to the floor. The widow took a slow sip of wine, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "If you ever wear my clothes into town again, you're fired." Little Johnny asked his dad, "Can I get a $200 bike for my birthday?" His dad sighed, "Johnny, we've got an $80,000 mortgage. A bike, maybe for Christmas." Christmas came, and Johnny asked again. Dad shook his head. "Sorry, kid, that mortgage is still eating us alive." A couple of days later, Johnny was seen lugging a suitcase out the front door. His dad stopped him. "Whoa, where do you think you're going?" Johnny huffed. "Last night, I heard you tell Mom you were pulling out." Then she said, "Wait, I'm coming too. And I'll be if I get stuck with an $80,000 mortgage." Fred and Mary got married but couldn't afford a honeymoon, so they spent their first night at Fred's parents' house. The next morning, little Johnny, Fred's kid brother, sat down for breakfast. As he grabbed his backpack, he asked, "Mom, are Fred and Mary up yet?" "No," she replied. Johnny smirked. "Do you know what I think?" His mom cut him off. "I don't want to hear what you think. Just go to school." At lunchtime, Johnny came home and asked again, "Are Fred and Mary up yet?" "No." Johnny grinned. "Do you know what I think?" His mom groaned. "Enough, Johnny. Eat your lunch and get back to school." After school, Johnny walked in and asked one more time, "Are Fred and Mary up yet?" His mom sighed. "Fine, Johnny." "What do you think?" Johnny shrugged. "Well, last night, Fred came to my room looking for the Vaseline, and I think I gave him my airplane glue." Took the family out to eat at Applebee's. The parking lot was packed, but I spotted a guy heading to his car, so I waited about 10 minutes for him to pull out. Just as he left, a car full of young girls swooped in and stole my spot. You know the type. I rolled down my window and told them I'd been waiting for that space. The driver just smirked and said, "Too bad. Your name wasn't on it." Livid, but keeping my cool, I found another spot, parked, and went inside to eat. While we enjoyed our meal, I noticed the girls at the bar taking shots and getting completely wasted. That's when inspiration struck. When we finished, I slipped our waiter a $20 bill and gave him a simple task. Wait 10 minutes after we leave, then go up to the girls and tell them someone called, saying their car just got keyed. Now let me be clear, I did not key their car. About an hour later, I called the waiter to see how it went. He could barely talk from laughing. Apparently, the girls lost their minds, screaming, freaking out, even calling the cops. Here's where it gets even better. The police arrived, checked the car, and found zero damage. But they did notice something else. The girls were too wasted to drive. The cops left, circled the lot, and waited. Sure enough, not long after, the girls stumbled out, got in the car, and started the engine. Boom! Parking lot lit up in blue lights. DUI arrests all around. I didn't hear about the bonus until a week later when I went back for a beer. The same waiter saw me, still laughing about it, and filled me in on what happened. I handed him another $20. Best $40 I ever spent, and I kept some drunk drivers off the road. A baby is born with light skin and fair hair. The expectant father, whose features are quite dark, is outraged. He gathers his weapons and heads straight for the only fair-skinned man in the entire region, a missionary the next village over who bears a striking resemblance to this newborn child. The man storms straight into the missionary's room. "How do you explain this?" he demands. The missionary, desperate from the predicament he has found himself, points out the window. Look to the field," he says. "The sheep that graze there are white, and yet that one right amongst them is completely black. This is God's way." "Oh, okay, I understand," the villager says. "I won't say anything about the baby if you don't say anything about the sheep." A journalist goes to a poor remote village for a documentary. He saw an old man and asked him to narrate a typical happy story of his village. The old man smiled and began. "One day, a long time ago, my goat got lost in the mountains. As is our tradition, all the men of the village gathered to drink vodka first and then looked for the goat. When we finally found her, as is our tradition, we all drank some more vodka, and all the men in the village each got their turn to mate with the goat. We had so much fun that day." The journalist realized that he couldn't publish such a story, so he asked the old man if he had another happy story. The old man smiled again and started all over again. "Once, my neighbor's wife got lost in the mountains. As per our tradition, all of the village's men gathered to drink vodka and then went to look for her. As is our tradition, when we finally found her, all the men in the village got their turn to mate with the neighbor's wife. We had great fun that day." The journalist couldn't publish that story either and therefore asked, "Don't you have a story that is less happy? Something, sadder?" The old man's smile faded. His eyes welled up. In a sad, soft voice, he began, "One day I got lost in the mountains." A Swedish farming village in 1265 is facing a crisis. They haven't had any rain in almost 2 months. All of their crops are dead or dying, and many of the citizens are starving. One day, Sven comes bursting into his kitchen, scooping his wife Helga into his arms and dancing with joy. "Sven, what's gotten into you? Why are you so happy?" Helga asks. "My darling, I've just spoken to Rudolph," Sven replies. "You know Rudolph. He's got a great plait of fire-red hair and a big bushy red beard. He says that we'll get 4 inches of glorious rain by tomorrow. Oh joy, all our problems are solved." Helga slaps at her husband. "Oh, Sven! You've gotten my hopes up. Why are you so confident in this Rudolph fellow?" Sven beams at his wife and says, "Because, Rudolph, the red-nosed reindeer. Merry, merry." An elderly man decided it was time to move on, so he moved into a retirement home. He packed his stuff and moved into a retirement home. On his first day there, as he was unpacking his stuff into his room, he could help but notice that the woman in the room across the hall was staring at him. He thought it was odd but decided not to let it bother him. Later that night, he went to the cafeteria to get dinner. He sat down at his table, and lo and behold, the woman from the hallway was sitting at the table next to him. There was no food on her table. She just sat there staring at him with fixed eyes. The man grew increasingly annoyed but didn't say anything. After a scrumptious meal, he went to the lounge to play nightly bingo. He was enjoying the game until he noticed the woman again, staring at him. He had enough. He went up to her and said, "Ma'am, I couldn't help noticing that you have been staring at me ever since I arrived. Could you please stop? It is a bit bothersome." She replied, "I am sorry, it is just that you look so much like my third husband." The man felt bad. "I'm sorry. If you don't mind me asking, how many husbands have you had?" "2," was the woman's reply. 2 elderly sisters, Sister Grace and Sister Margaret, were returning from the evening market. It was getting late, and they still had quite a walk ahead to reach their convent. Suddenly, Sister Grace grabbed Sister Margaret's arm, her voice filled with concern. "Do you see that man behind us? Is he following us?" Sister Margaret glanced back, her eyes narrowing. "It looks like he might be. What do you think he wants?" Without missing a beat, Sister Grace whispered, "I think he's up to no good." "What should we do?" Sister Margaret, thinking quickly, replied, "Let's split up. I'll go left, and you take the right path to the convent." They parted ways, and a few minutes later, Sister Grace arrived safely at the convent. As she paced nervously, worried for her friend, Sister Margaret came running down the path, breathless but safe. Sister Grace rushed to her. "What happened?" Sister Margaret caught her breath and replied, "Well, I started running, and the man began chasing me." "What did you do?" asked Sister Grace, eyes wide. "The only thing I could think of," Sister Margaret said with a smirk. "I hiked up my habit and ran." Sister Grace gasped. "And what did he do?" Sister Margaret grinned. "He dropped his trousers." Sister Grace, holding her rosary, whispered, "And then what happened?" With a chuckle, Sister Margaret said, "Isn't it obvious? A sister with her habit up runs faster than a man with his trousers down." I'm at Walmart, scanning and bagging my nearly $300 worth of groceries, while the employee who's making $15 an hour stands by and monitors the process. Then this happened. Her. "Why are you double bagging all your groceries?" Me. "Excuse me." Her. "You're wasting our bags." Me. "If you don't like the way I'm bagging my groceries, feel free to come over and do it yourself." Her. "That's not my job." Me. "Okay, then I'll bag my groceries however I like, if that's all right with you." Her. "Why are you using 2 bags?" Me. "Because the bags are weak, and I don't want the handles to break or the bottoms to rip out." Her. "Well, that's because you're putting too much stuff in each bag." If you split the items into 2 bags, you wouldn't need to double bag. 10 seconds of me just staring at her. Me. So you want me to split these items in half and put half in a different bag so I don't need to double bag? Her. Exactly. Me. So I would be double bagging anyway, just with a different method? The call to the attic. Hello? Hi, sweetie, it's Daddy. Can you put Mommy on the phone? No, Daddy. She's in the attic with Uncle Mark. There's a pause. Honey, you don't have an Uncle Mark. Oh, yes, I do. He's in the attic with Mommy right now. Another pause. Okay, listen carefully, Daddy says, trying to stay calm. Put the phone down, go to the attic, knock on the door, and tell Mommy that Daddy just got home. Okay, Daddy, hold on a second. A few moments later, the little girl returns to the phone. I did it, Daddy. And what happened? He asks, trying to control the panic in his voice. Well, she says, Mommy got really scared. She jumped out of bed and ran toward the attic stairs, but she tripped on the way up and hit her head. She's not moving now. Daddy's heart skips a beat. Oh no. And Uncle Mark? Uncle Mark jumped out of bed too, but he was so scared he tried to climb out the window. But the window was locked, so he jumped into the tree instead. He's stuck in it now, and I think he might be sleeping too. A long silence. A longer silence. An even longer silence. Finally, Daddy stammers. Wait, tree? Sweetheart, is this 7754932? A man hires a blonde to paint stripes down the middle of a road, giving her one simple rule. She must paint at least 4 miles per day to keep the job. On the first day, she absolutely crushes it. 8 miles. The boss is blown away. The second day, she paints 4 miles. Not as impressive, but still meeting the requirement. On the third day, she only manages 2 miles. The boss raises an eyebrow, but figures maybe she's just tired. By the fourth day, she barely scrapes out 1 mile. Frustrated, the boss finally asks, "What's going on? You started off amazing. Why are you slowing down so much?" The blonde wipes her forehead and sighs. Well, I'm getting farther and farther away from the paint bucket. A blind man walks into a restaurant and asks the owner for a dirty fork from a previous customer instead of a menu. Confused but curious, the owner obliges. The blind man sniffs the fork and confidently orders, meatloaf and mashed potatoes." Amazed, the owner tests him again on his next visit. Another sniff, and the blind man declares, "Mac and cheese with broccoli." Determined to stump him, the owner hatches a plan. He rushes to the kitchen, hands a fork to his wife Mary, and says, "Rub this on your." Mary complies, and the owner proudly hands the fork to the blind man. The blind man sniffs, pauses, and smirks. Well, well, I didn't know Mary worked here. A young man buys a chicken farm in the countryside but knows little about raising chickens. Seeking advice, he approaches a seasoned farmer who agrees to help. "Meet me here tomorrow at 6 a.m. and I'll show you the ropes," the old farmer says. The next morning, the young man arrives and is stunned to see the farmer dressed to the nines. 3-piece suit, top hat, cane, monocle, and even spats. Confused but silent, he follows the farmer into the chicken coop. The moment they step inside, chaos erupts. A swarm of 20 to 30 chickens attacks the young man, pecking, clawing, and flapping relentlessly. After a frantic 30 seconds, he bolts from the coop, bruised and breathless. Turning back, he sees the old farmer standing calmly, untouched, with not a single chicken bothering him. "Why didn't they attack you?" the young man asks in disbelief. The farmer tips his hat and says, "Lesson 1, son. When dealing with chickens, always dress impeccably." A company posted a sign outside their office. Job vacancy. Apply within requirements. 1. Type at least 80 words per minute. 2. Be proficient with computers. 3. Be bilingual. Weeks passed with no applicants until a dog strolled in, pointed to the sign, and wagged its tail eagerly. The manager, baffled, said, "I admire your enthusiasm, but you're not qualified. You need to type 80 words per minute and, well, paws aren't great for typing." Without hesitation, the dog jumped onto a stool, typed over 100 words in under a minute, and hopped back down. Stunned, the manager stammered, "Impressive, but you also need to be good with computers." The dog grabbed a keyboard, hacked into the building's system, and shut down every security camera with ease. Flabbergasted, the manager muttered, "All right, but the final requirement is being bilingual." The dog stared him down, then confidently replied, "Meow." A man hurriedly rushes his limp dog to the vet. After examining the dog, the vet sadly declares it dead. The man, still frantic, demands a second opinion. The vet heads to the back room and returns with a cat. The cat sniffs the dog's body, then meows. The vet says, "I'm sorry, but the cat also thinks your dog is dead." The man, still not convinced, insists on another opinion. The vet brings in a black Labrador. The dog sniffs the body and barks. The vet says, "I'm sorry, but the lab also thinks your dog is dead." Reluctantly, the man agrees to accept the news and asks, "How much do I owe you?" The vet responds, $650. $650 to tell me my dog is dead? The man exclaims in shock. "Well," the vet says, "I only charged you $50 for my initial diagnosis. The extra $600 is for the CAT scan and lab tests." "I bet you don't know what day it is," the wife teased as her husband headed out the door. Caught off guard, but quick on his feet, he replied, "Of course I do, my love. How could I forget?" and hurried off to catch his bus. At 10 a.m., the doorbell rang, and a box of long-stemmed red roses was delivered. At 1 p.m., a 2-pound box of her favorite chocolates arrived. By 3 p.m., a boutique sent over a stunning designer dress. The wife could hardly contain her excitement as she waited for her husband to return. When he walked in, he was feeling quite proud of himself. She greeted him with a beaming smile, saying, "First the flowers, then the chocolates, and then the dress. This has been the best Groundhog Day ever." Betty, a sweet little old lady with a sunny disposition, had been living a contented life, except for one small issue that recently emerged. One day, she visited her doctor and said, "Doctor, I have a bit of a gas problem. It doesn't bother me much, though. My farts are always silent and don't smell at all." The doctor raised an eyebrow. Intrigued, "Is that so?" Betty nodded earnestly. "Absolutely. In fact, I've probably farted about 20 times since I've been sitting here. And you didn't even notice because they're silent and odorless." The doctor, suppressing a smile, replied, "I see. Here, take these pills and come back next week." Betty followed the instructions faithfully, but over the next few days, she noticed an alarming change. When she returned to the doctor, she was visibly upset. "Doctor," she exclaimed, "I don't know what was in those pills, but now my farts, though still silent, smell absolutely horrible." The doctor smiled and said, "Excellent. Now that we've cleared up your sinuses, let's work on your hearing." Thomas, at 32, was still single. One day a friend asked him, "Why aren't you married? Haven't you found a woman who could make a good wife?" Thomas sighed and replied, "Well, I've found many women I wanted to marry, but every time I bring them home to meet my parents, my mother doesn't approve." His friend thought for a moment and said, "I've got the perfect solution. Just find someone who's exactly like your mother. A few months later, they bumped into each other again, and the friend eagerly asked, "Did you find the right girl? Did your mother like her?" Thomas frowned and replied, "Yes, I found the perfect girl. She was just like my mother." "You were right. My mother liked her very much." His friend, relieved, asked, "Then what's the problem?" Thomas replied with a deep sigh, "My father doesn't like her." An elderly couple was celebrating their 60th anniversary. Yes, 60 years of wedded bliss. They had been childhood sweethearts and decided to retire back in their old neighborhood, reliving the glory days. One afternoon, they strolled hand in hand to their old school and, lo and behold, the door was open. They couldn't resist sneaking inside. They found the very desk they'd shared all those years ago, and sure enough, Jerry had carved "I love you, Sally" into it. He was quite the romantic, apparently. Feeling nostalgic, they wandered back home, but something unusual happened. A bag of money literally fell out of an armored car, landing right at their feet. It was like the universe was just handing them a little anniversary gift. Sally, being the quick thinker she is, scooped it up. Unsure what to do next, they decided to take it home. Inside the bag, a cool $50,000. Jerry, always the law-abiding citizen, said, "We've got to give it back." Sally, on the other hand, with a mischievous grin, said, "Finders keepers." She tucked the money back into the bag and hid it in their attic. The next day, 2 police officers showed up in the neighborhood, knocking on doors. "Excuse me, did either of you happen to find a bag that fell out of an armored car yesterday?" Sally, ever the quick thinker, said, "Nope, didn't see a thing." Jerry, without missing a beat, pointed at her and said, "She's lying. It's in the attic." Sally shot back, "Don't believe him. He's getting senile." The officers exchanged glances, clearly unsure of who to believe. They turned to Jerry and asked, "Okay, tell us the story from the beginning." Jerry, looking serious, said, "Well, when Sally and I were walking home from school yesterday," the first officer turned to his partner and whispered, "We're out of here." Clearly, some cases are best left unsolved. A sweet little old lady dialed her local bank, only to end up with their call center instead. "Is this the High Street branch?" she asked politely. "No, madam," came the cheery response. "We handle all calls centrally now. It's company policy." "But I need to speak to the branch," she insisted. "Madam, I can handle anything for you. What's your query?" "I'm not sure you can help, young man," she replied, a touch skeptical. "Trust me," the operator said confidently. "There's nothing the branch can do that I can't." "All right," she sighed. "Can you take a quick look at the counter and see if I left my gloves there this morning?" A man appeared and announced to the villagers that he would buy monkeys for $10 each. The villagers, seeing that there were many monkeys around, went out to the forest and started catching them. The man bought thousands at $10, and as supplies started to diminish, the villagers stopped their effort. He further announced that he would now buy at $20. This renewed the efforts of the villagers, and they started catching monkeys again. Soon, the supply diminished even further, and people started going back to their farms. The offer increased to $25 each, and the supply of monkeys became so little that it was an effort to even see a monkey, let alone catch it. The man now announced that he would buy monkeys at $50. However, since he had to go to the city on some business, his assistant would now buy on behalf of him. In the absence of the man, the assistant told the villagers, "Look at all these monkeys in the big cage that the man has collected. I will sell them to you at $35, and when the man returns from the city, you can sell them to him for $50 each." The villagers rounded up with all their savings and bought all the monkeys. They never saw the man nor his assistant, only monkeys everywhere. Now you have a better understanding of how the cryptocurrency market works. One dark night in Texas, disaster struck when a fire erupted inside the local chemical plant. In the blink of an eye, it exploded into massive flames, and the alarm rang out to fire departments for miles around. As the first responders arrived, the chemical company president rushed over to the firemen in charge, visibly panicked. "All our secret formulas are locked in the vault at the center of the plant. They must be saved. I'll offer $50,000 to the fire department that brings them out intact." But the flames were relentless, and the firefighters couldn't get close enough. The president, desperate to protect his precious secrets, raised the reward to $100,000. But still, no one could break through the inferno. Then, from the distance, a lone siren pierced the air. Slowly, a rickety old fire truck hobbled into view. It was the Rural Volunteer Fire Brigade, mostly made up of old men over 65. The sleek, new fire trucks parked outside the plant watched in stunned silence as this ancient, run-down engine roared past them, charging straight into the heart of the blaze. Without hesitation, the elderly crew of firefighters jumped off the truck, and to everyone's amazement, they dove straight into the flames, fighting it back on all sides with a vigor that no one had expected. Within minutes, the fire was under control, and the secret formulas were saved. The chemical company president, overwhelmed by their bravery, announced that he was raising the reward to $200,000 and walked over to personally thank each of the firefighters. A local TV station, eager to capture the moment, interviewed the fire chief, a sprightly 70-year-old named Leroy. "What are you going to do with all that money?" they asked. Leroy, with a grin, replied, "Well, the first thing we're gonna do is fix the brakes on that fire truck." One night, a wife wakes to find her husband missing from their bed. Concerned, she goes downstairs and sees him sitting at the kitchen table, staring into the distance with a cup of coffee. Noticing a tear in his eye, she softly asks, "What's wrong, dear? Why are you up so late?" He looks up, lost in thought. "Do you remember when we were dating 20 years ago and you were just 17? Touched by his nostalgia, she nods. "Of course." "And do you remember when your father caught us in the back seat of my car? How he shoved a shotgun in my face and said, 'Marry my daughter or spend 20 years in jail.'" She smiles at the memory and replies, "Yes, I remember." He wipes his cheek and sighs. "I would have been free today." After 37 years of marriage, Gerald left his wife, Catherine, for his young secretary. His new girlfriend insisted they live in the luxurious multi-million-dollar home that Gerald had shared with Catherine. Thanks to some better legal representation, Gerald won the battle for the house. He gave Catherine just 3 days to move out. On the first day, she packed her belongings into boxes, crates, and suitcases. On the second, she had movers come to collect her things. On the third day, she sat down for the last time at their elegant dining room table, lit by candlelight. She poured herself a glass of Chardonnay, indulged in a pound of shrimp, and enjoyed a jar of caviar. After finishing her meal, Catherine took the leftover shrimp shells, dipped them in caviar, and stuffed them into the hollow curtain rods of every room in the house. She cleaned up the kitchen, left the house, and never looked back. For the first few days, Gerald and his new girlfriend basked in their new life. But soon, the house began to smell. They tried everything: cleaning, mopping, airing out the rooms, even checking for dead rodents in the vents. Exterminators were called in, carpets were replaced, and air fresheners were hung in every corner. Nothing worked. As the weeks passed, the stench grew worse. Visitors stopped coming, repairmen refused to work, and the maid quit. In the end, They couldn't stand the odor and decided to move. Even though they slashed the price of the house in half, they couldn't find a buyer. Word spread, and soon local realtors wouldn't even return their calls. They were forced to take out a large loan to buy a new home. A month later, Catherine called Gerald to check in. He shared the saga of their foul-smelling house, and she listened with interest. Then, in a calm voice, she said that she missed her old home and would be willing to reduce her divorce settlement if she could buy the house back. Not realizing the full extent of the problem, Gerald quickly agreed to sell the house to her for about a tenth of its original value, but only if she signed the papers that day. She agreed, and within the hour, his lawyers delivered the documents. A week later, Gerald and his girlfriend smiled as they watched the movers pack up their things for their new house. They even took the curtain rods with them. A man tired of living in poverty sat down with his wife and said, "I'm done with being poor. I'm going to work overseas and change my life." Determined to find a way out, he set his sights on Africa, where he hoped opportunity awaited. Years later, the man returned home, his clothes crisp and his demeanor changed. As he approached the house, he was stunned by the sight of the luxurious, grand home that stood before him. He knocked on the door, eager to reconnect with his family. A servant answered the door, and the man asked, "Is the lady of the house in?" "Just a moment," the servant replied. The wife soon appeared, her eyes widening as she saw her husband transformed into a wealthy man. "Wow, you look incredible," she exclaimed. With a smile, the husband proudly replied, "I'm rich now." "Really?" she asked. "How did that happen?" He shared his story with excitement. "I went to Africa, and what I saw shocked me. People walking around with no underwear and sleeping on the bare sand. It was there I realized an opportunity. I started making and selling underwear and beds. The demand was so high, I became rich in no time." The wife, taking in his story, paused for a moment before responding. "So you went all the way to Africa, worked hard, making beds and underwear, and got rich. Meanwhile, I stayed here, without underwear, sleeping on a single bed, and I got real rich." This humorous tale highlights the unexpected paths we take to success and the twists that life can offer. Whether through hard work or clever insights, wealth can come from the most surprising places, and sometimes even without all the luxuries we might think are necessary. An elderly man in Tucson calls his daughter in Los Angeles and says, "I'm sorry to bother you, but I have some bad news. Your mother and I are getting a divorce. 40 years of living in misery is enough." "Dad, what are you talking about?" the daughter exclaims. "We can't stand each other anymore," the old man replies. "We're tired of fighting, and I've had enough. Call your brother in Miami and let him know. I'm done talking about it." He hangs up. Panicked, the daughter calls her brother, who immediately erupts on the phone. "There's no way they're divorcing," he roars. "I'll fix this, don't worry." He calls Tucson right away and shouts at their father, "You are not getting divorced. Don't do anything until I get there. I'm calling my sister, and we'll be there by tomorrow morning. Don't make any decisions until then. Do you hear me?" He slams down the phone. The elderly man hangs up and looks at his wife. "Well," he says, "they're coming for Thanksgiving and paying their own way." A man sat on the edge of the bed, watching his wife as she gazed at her reflection in the mirror. Her birthday was coming up, so he decided to ask, "What would you like for your birthday?" Without glancing away from the mirror, she responded, "I'd love to be 8 again." Excited to make her wish come true, he got to work. The next morning, he prepared a huge bowl of sugary cereal, Cocoa Pops, just like when she was a child. He grinned as he placed it in front of her. Next, he took her to Adventure World, a nearby theme park filled with thrilling rides. They spent hours racing from one exhilarating attraction to the next: the dizzying death slide, the nerve-wracking wall of fear, the wild screaming roller coaster, all the rides that promised adrenaline. By the end of the day, she was pale, queasy, and stumbling from exhaustion. But he wasn't done yet. He drove her to McDonald's, where he ordered a Happy Meal, extra fries, and a chocolate shake, just like she used to get. Afterward, they went to the movies, where she snacked on a giant bucket of popcorn, soda, and a large bag of M&Ms, just like the ones she loved as a child. When they finally returned home, she was so worn out she could hardly keep her eyes open. She dragged herself to the bedroom and collapsed into bed. With a big grin, he leaned over and asked, "So, how was it to be 8 again?" She opened one eye, shot him a look, and snapped, "I meant my dress size, you idiot." A man may listen, but he doesn't always understand. There is a village of idiots. Every month, the village gathers in the town square, where 3 people from the neighboring town each bring in an object. So the townsfolk can guess what it is. It's great fun for the whole town. Women, men, young and old alike join the festivities. The first person walks to the middle of the crowd with a tricycle. The guessing begins. Someone yells out, "It's a boat." "No, it's not a boat." Another yells, "It's a seesaw." No, it's not a seesaw." More and more guesses are shouted until someone says, "Is it a tricycle?" "Yes," says the man presenting, and the entire village shouts, "Hooray for the idiot!" The next guest comes in with a bicycle, and the game begins again. A man yells, "It's another tricycle." No, it's not a tricycle. The next person yells, "This one's gotta be a boat." No, not a boat. On and on. This goes until a young girl says, "Is it a bike?" "Yes!" They exclaim and they all cheer, "Hooray for the idiot!" The next person goes to the middle and has... At Walmart, the cashier rang up $46.64. I gave her $50, and she handed back $46.64. I explained her mistake, but she insisted she was right, twice. I left with $46.64 and a free laugh. They walk among us. At Starbucks, I used a buy one, get one free coupon for lattes. The cashier saw the promo board and said, "They're already buy one, get one, so they must be free." I walked out with 2 free lattes. They walk among us. Walking on the beach, a friend yelled, "Look, a dead bird." Someone glanced at the sky and asked, "Where?" They walk among us. My brother asked a realtor which way was north. She replied, "Does the sun rise in the north?" After he corrected her, she said, "Oh, I don't keep up with all that." They walk among us. At my call center job, someone asked, "What hours are you open?" I said, 24/7. They asked, "Eastern or Pacific time?" They walk among us. My sister has a tool to cut seatbelts in emergencies. She keeps it in her trunk. They walk among us. Buying beer, we got a 10% discount per case. The cashier gave us 20% off for 2 cases. They walk among us. At the airport, I reported lost luggage. The agent said, "Don't worry, has your plane arrived yet?" I replied, "No, it's circling the airport." They walk among us. A man ordering pizza was asked if he wanted 4 or 6 slices. He replied, 4. "I'm not hungry enough for 6. Yep, they walk among us. Bless their hearts. Last Cyber Monday, Sarah had one mission: snag the elusive 75-inch smart TV that was marked down to an irresistible price. She set her alarm for midnight, armed with snacks, her credit card, and unwavering determination. As the clock struck 12, her laptop, phone, and tablet lit up with different retailer websites. "This is my year," she muttered, fingers poised over the keyboard. But the moment she clicked, add to cart. Chaos ensued. Her phone app crashed. Her laptop froze. The tablet inexplicably started showing ads for cat food instead of electronics. Panic set in as the dreaded words appeared. Out of stock! Desperate, Sarah opened every tab imaginable, frantically refreshing pages. Then a miracle. A small store she'd never heard of had the TV. Her adrenaline spiked as she typed in her payment details, trembling with excitement. Success. She sat back in triumph, dreaming of movie marathons on her new massive screen. That was until the confirmation email arrived. She'd accidentally ordered 75 portable TVs instead of one 75-inch TV. Her garage is now a mini electronics store, and her friends have never been happier. She gifted them all TVs for the holidays.